All right, so we'll just try to storm through it. Hopefully, it won't be too bad. So if we could just go, Ricardo, if you could go and just say a couple of things about
Introduce myself. That's what I heard. That's what I'm gonna do. So hello everybody. My name is Ricardo Rojo. I go by Rico in real life. I'm a second year medical student going to third year. From California, raised in Texas, now in DC. I don't know what to say honestly. Pretty much it. Not that interesting.
yourself. Okay, Gregory. Thank you for that.
Alrighty. Well, hey everybody. My name is Gregory. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them, and I'm an arts transfer student. Hopefully, going to School of Visual Arts in New York in the fall. But other than that, I work as the youth programs coordinator for Trans Family Support Services, and I work primarily in San Diego, California.
Great, Dr. Rose.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Rose. I am a professional counselor here in DC as well as in Maryland. I in private practice. I am currently contracted with two locations. Um, Prone Escoville is my primary and also counseling solutions. So if anyone is looking for locations for service, they do provide services for private practice for they will be looking for individual, family, or couples counseling.
Great. So as we said tonight, we will be discussing childhood as it relates to the LGBTQ community as well as the Black community. And I think the first thing that I thought that we should address is the lack of conversations that take place in the household, because many of the development starts, of course, when you're a child, and it starts in the house, which you're learning from your parents. And so I really want to talk, Dr. Rose, if you could first address it, and then we can move on to everyone else talking about their personal experiences. But what are some of the effects on the psyche of a child when sexuality is not seen as something that can be explored, and there's a lot of negative talk in the household? How does that affect the psyche of the child growing up and their confidence with themselves as they explore?
So to not have a conversations at home or to have ill-informed conversations at home, it stunts the growth, it stunts the development, and it actually stunts the self-acceptance. The truth is, we are beings. The sexual aspect of who we are is a huge part of our existence. So to put any forms of shame, guilt, to reinforce it with religious ideology and say that God says and God thinks, that culture says and culture thinks, that society will do and society will say, right? To continue to kind of like have these big thoughts, ideas coming against someone who is only trying to figure out who and what they are, it really stunts their ability for self-development, and it causes them to also question internally everything that they are, everything that they actually are hearing, right? So we don't actually talk about, we hear people talk about that small voice, that little voice, what is going on inside of you. Well, that's exactly who you are. So if everything on the outside of you is telling you you're wrong, you're not right, that you're outside of whatever norm is, then who and what you are, that thing that you were born with, it never fully actualizes. I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's very true. And I definitely also want to talk about the religion aspect as well, because you're right, as we do continue to place these barriers on children and their minds, and just in society, we think about girls with pink and boys with blue. We see it so much. So it definitely does take place outside of the home as well. But before we dive more into the religion, Ricardo, Gregory, if you could just share some of your personal experiences in your household. Was it an open environment? Was it not? How did that affect you personally? Did you notice some effects? Just diving as deep as you want.
So I can go first if Gregory doesn't want to go. So in my family, actually, we didn't necessarily talk about it, but we also didn't shunt it. Luckily, I can say I'm fortunate enough to where like So for example, I have cousins who are gay, I have an uncle who is gay, and an aunt who's bisexual, and my family kind of took it in as, that's the norm. Despite them being religious Catholics, they were like, that's the norm, that's how life is. So I feel like me being exposed to that earlier on kind of helped me accept myself, understand what people go through, kind of see different perspectives per se, because I also had friends who it was not like that for them. So I was able to see how the acceptance in my family, how they didn't shunt it. They weren't the ones to hide it. They weren't to be like, oh, like, don't you dare look at that. They were just like, that's normal. It's life. So I actually fortunately had a really good experience with my family. Like I said, they didn't hide it. So I do really believe that helped me kind of accept myself, kind of understand what was going on. Of course, I went through that phase where I was still confused with myself, but however, I felt like that length in time wasn't as long as other people who struggled deeply with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Gregory, before I go, do you have anything you like?
Yeah, definitely. For myself, I grew up with a mixed family household where I have a white mom and black dad, and living in San Diego, it felt like there wasn't as much representation as I needed, and I didn't grow up with like a very affluent cultural community, and so I assimilated with a lot of my peers who were LGBTQ but not people of color, and so that's when I started to feel off, was like not being a queer person but being like a queer black person, and I didn't have a community to really connect with. And so um, with my own father, we had a very difficult and traumatic relationship, and it got worse after I came out. And up until that point, I didn't feel like there was any sort of like religious or like spiritual confliction with that. But after coming out, then that started to be a way against me, or like as a tactic against me to discredit or devalue my sexuality and my experiences. And I never saw that aspect from my family before, up until being myself. And it was a very difficult and traumatic experience to have a not supportive family, but to still live in a community that was very accepting. And I did work at LGBTQ centers, and I was volunteering and doing all these things, but it was just a very weird divide. And so I definitely have some family traumas with that for sure.
Well,
But moving forward in life, things have definitely gotten better.
that's good to hear, because the question I was going to ask when I heard about your family was, how was it on the outside? Did you have outside support as far as friends and a community? But my question to you, as you said, you were exploring your blackness and your black side as well as your sexuality. How did it feel as far as representation in the media? Did you see yourself? Did that play how, because typically we view what we view is what we become, because our thoughts create our reality. So did you see yourself having role models or people to mold yourself, or did you have to kind of figure out your identity on your own?
Yeah, it was very like a lot of self-exploration, but honestly, I didn't know that much about the LGBTQ community until I had other friends that were a part of that community and talking about it and sharing their experiences. But the first trans person that I really admired was Laverne Cox, and she still is like such an inspiration to me. And just like having her presence to be like so accepted and so vocal, and how she like stands up for herself is just really powerful for me. And knowing about her was really what got me started on my gender journey and learning about myself. And as I mentioned before, like living in San Diego, or certain parts of San Diego, there's not that much diversity. So I felt like there's racism in the LGBTQ community at the same time that there's homophobia in the Black community. And that was kind of where my divide was like, I felt accepted for only parts of my identity, and I didn't really have people to connect with on that stuff. So I've tried to explore other outlets and travel to different. Within my family, it was like my dad comes from the Caribbean, so like he's very connected to that culture, but we didn't really watch movies or talk about being Black, and it wasn't like a conversation. It just felt like he was just a person in my house that was Black, and that was it. So I feel like I missed out on a lot, and I wish that I had more people to connect with.
Yeah, can I say something in response to that?
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So something that I believe Ricardo, correct me if I say names incorrectly, right? So, sorry, but I think it was Ricardo, um, said at first about the having the representation in his own family, right? Being Catholic, yet there's representation. And so there is this unconscious happening that's happening when we have that. There's this way that we're taught to be, and yet this way that in the household people are actually doing, right? So the ability to have a conflict of doing and being in the household and it not really mean anything negative actually unconsciously allows children to develop, to question things, to know that two or three things are possible at once. And there's not really one way, even though I'm being told there is only one way, right? So this unconscious questioning, this unconscious being of more than one thing, this duality of existence sometimes is opening itself, even if it's not being discussed and taught, right? And then on the other hand, where it's not being talked about or discussed until we approach it, and then we bring in all of the bricks, right, to still try to get you in this one path, this one way, right? So this stunting, but also removing any ability of having this idea that more than one thing can be true at one time, more than one way of being, right? And then someone who does have a number of ways of being, right? This intersectionality that's constantly existing in my life and that I'm experiencing, but no one's actually talking about. It causes different levels, multiple levels of questioning of not only who am I, but where do I belong? Right? Because not only is there not representation, the representation doesn't see me, doesn't love me, doesn't understand me. So there's this squeezing that sometimes happens. And then what happens is sometimes what I'm finding is that the presentations or the representations are sometimes themselves kind of stereotypic, very marginalized or small as well. So even as we're seeking, I'm like, but that's still not me, right? Yeah, but that's still not me. So even with some forms of representation, even on the outside, it's still really hard to find who and what you are, which is why stopping, and which is why even in therapy, I start with the who are you, so we get that voice that was sometimes crushed on those bricks to speak, because even as you self-actualize, it still might not be within the constructs of even what it is that you are seeing and being represented to you. And I think that's really important, because as you do that, that great part of you that might just be a little bit different is what actually makes you more unique, but also opening the doors for those that don't have the voice, don't know how to find the representation, and can't get from up underneath those bricks, except by seeing you being just a little bit different than everybody else, so that they know that more than one way, more than two ways, more than three ways exist. And this identity or this way of being or this group that I'm a part of, it still has complexity to it, and I can be a part of that complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely an amazing point. And also, just speaking about my dad's experience, traveling from another country and technically being considered an immigrant, that his culture and his perspective of things is totally different than what I've experienced. And I know that he carries his own trauma and his own family history, and that's just being passed down to me. So I understand why they have that perspective. I get like where that comes from, but it's just like very invalidating be to be the adult in a relationship with other adults. And I've seen myself grow a lot. I've seen how I've recovered from a lot of trauma, and not to get into a whole conversation about that, but there was one point that my dad had expressed that he believes that LGBTQ lifestyle, or just being queer as a whole, is not a Black thing. And he doesn't value, like, he didn't see that LGBTQ people like exist outside of mainstream media, or that it's a recent thing. And I see where he's coming from, but totally wrong. And it just comes from trauma and lack of awareness.
Yeah. And can I follow up? I'm sorry. I hope I'm not stepping.
Oh,
But yeah. So, and such a myth, and it's actually a new myth. And what's I'm a history buff. I love history. I love spirituality, religion, all parts of it. And I think it's necessary to always study it because that is where you find real truths. And in studying throughout and across historical context, you find universal truths and not just his story, her story, whatever made sense for the moment. And it is actually not true that homosexuality or anybody a part of the LGBTQ plus or trans, like it is not a new thing, and it is not in contradiction to African American history, African diasporas. That is a myth. In actuality, it was always accepted. It was always a part of our history. The same across when we say brown groups, right? And that's Indian, Afro, Asiatic, all of that. It is only when we brought in forms of Christianity under British colonization and their laws where it became some form of a law against religion, a law against the land, and they actually outlawed people just being themselves, right? And what's really important to not only study that is that we start to realize that when chains and when colonizations ended, they didn't have to continue to put the laws in because we kind of took that over. We started to put ourselves in change, and we start putting each other into change and and we start putting each other into these boxes and continue the persecution, the marginalization with the narratives that were never ours. And even in the Black community, the truth is it wasn't until after the Civil War that most of us even identified with the idea of Christianity. Most up until that time, less than 20% even aligned themselves with the idea, but that was still only for the ability to get free because there were laws around that, right? So yeah, after Reconstruction, to be part of the American society, we're like, okay, we'll go ahead and embrace it all, right? And we'll take on some of these narratives just to be a part of it. Well, that actually didn't work out so great, but we still are holding on to those thoughts and those ideas and those narratives that aren't actually helping us out, and it's still doing that same thing, creating this divide, and then also finding reason to put out your own, right? To separate you from your own, to not love your own, and to continue to find ways to say you're not good enough, you're not good enough, not only for me, but for God himself, right? So it is the continuation of abuse and trauma that we've pulled. We just put different names on it, but it's the exact same thing.
wow.
Totally, yes. And there's so much to say about colonization, but
Yeah.
that's for another panel.
Well, no, you don't understand just how much you've hit the mark on just everything personally I've been going through as I explore Christianity and just religion in general. And us just talking about how religion is just another way of society, as you said, using it as a tool to conform and to construct. Even down to, I remember when I was doing research, the Bible that was being passed around during the transatlantic slave trade was not, the same Bible, that deep, knowing that that's the roots, especially in America, as we look at Christianity, as we look at what's a Christian, as we look at what is this. And as we talk about religion, and we talk about how sometimes people have a terrible experience with their sexuality and religion, and really realizing that religion is truly what you make it. Ricardo, one, I see a wonderful question in the chat about you being and your acceptance within the medical school and in your medical field, but also I would just love to hear some of your thoughts about you and your experience with religion, because I know that you said yours was more of a positive one, just due to the nature of your family and your environment. And did religion help you, actually empower you in a way? I'm curious to hear it, because oftentimes we hear the opposite story.
So personally, I was raised Catholic with my parents, but I feel like after I kind of came out to them, that I guess me growing up as a Catholic kind of went away. So I feel like after that, I kind of leaned towards like other religions, so like the Buddhists and stuff like that. So I lean more towards the idea of love and humanity and just how everybody's accepting of one another. So in a way, yes, because apart from Catholic, it helped me kind of like see the more positive aspect in life as to how everybody's equal in life. Nobody is different. Nobody should be considered different, no matter what you look like, who you are, what you consider yourself as. So yeah, it helped me see, I would say, that the bright aspect in life, just to appreciate everyone around me and to accept them no matter what.
Yeah, that's great. That really is great to hear. And I also do want to talk on because we did kind of talk on the Black community, and Gregory, you shared your experiences with your father and kind of that shunning or this code of silence that we do see within the Black community. And Dr. Rose, I would just love to hear your thoughts on how is this silence that we see not only when we explore sexuality, but also when we explore domestic violence and abuse. How is this loyalty to silence killing the community? How is it really just cycles repeating themselves? And how does it affect the child and how they review relationships, how they view love? If you could just share some thoughts.
Yeah, so with abuse, you had said religion and then domestic violence. So with silence in religion, anytime you put God on something, you are establishing it almost as if it is a law of science, right? That there is no other way. Anytime you put things, anytime you put religion around a system that is abusive, that does cause trauma, then it has no other choice but to beget of itself. Right. It establishes the idea that secrecy is okay, that trauma is natural and normal and expected, and that somehow you are responsible for it happening to you. So there is no safe place for you, and you should find out what it is about you specifically that is allowing all of this to happen to you. So it actually establishes the world to be an unsafe place, that people are not safe, and that you, with your title of parent, preacher, pastor, whatever it is, that you are complicit in harm. So therefore, I should never expect whether it be God, country, or the rock to ever see me as anything other than something that must be different, changed, hurt, and harmed. The same thing with domestic violence. Whenever we don't speak up and we're silent about it, what we do is further the notion with the child that there is no place that's safe for you, that you can't trust people, and that sometimes that you're the only thing and the only one you can trust, which is why sometimes those that are victimized become victimizers, but also will sometimes act out violently, anger, frustration, whatever it is, because they can only trust themselves to get people off of them, to get people to hear and see them. So whatever way that they can make that happen is what it is that they do. It's not like they would have a healthy way of doing it, right? Because they've not seen it. So you can't also create what it is that you've not seen. You can't replicate an experience that you've never actually had. So we create generations of whatever it is that we make with our hand. And I think that's really important for all of us to always remember that what you do, that little vibration of who and what you are, as you put it up on someone else, it's not just in that movement, it creates a movement of shift and change in their nature that also then impacts any and everyone else that they will come into contact with.
Yeah, thank you for that. Everything you just said, it really did resonate. I do see a quick thing, and I know we will be ending shortly, but I know Gregory might have to hop off in a second, which is totally fine. But I do see a question in the chat for any advice for dealing with guilt from trauma, whether it be PTSD or otherwise.
Yeah. So guilt and shame. So just imagine guilt and shame is like a weight on the back. Right? 9 times out of 10, you have guilt and shame because someone placed guilt and shame on you, right? So just imagine that being a weight, right? And it could be something as small as you forgot to clean your room, and therefore, instead of me making about you didn't clean the room, I'm making it that you are a horrible person. You make my life this, right? So all of this guilt is somehow I'm responsible for everything horrible in your life because I didn't do this one thing. It's like a weight. So then when you start to continue to carry that weight and then you look 2020, everyone's like 2020 is hindsight. 2020 is also a liar, but it also allows you to take on things that you don't actually need to take on, and you look at it in a way that's actually out of perspective. Because if you're looking at something that you were looking at when you're 8 at 28, well, of course you're not the same person. So you're going to see things at 28 that you wouldn't have seen at 8. So now to kind of judge yourself as this adult, looking at this kid of what they should have done and should have known and should have felt and Well, first of all, psychologically, your brain's not even fully functioning to put all those things together. But that weight that you're putting on now makes it kind of impossible for you to do anything about it. So removing guilt and shame allows you to at least stand up, even if you're that destructive, broken down, frustrated child. At least you can stand up. Right. And once you remove that shame and guilt to stand up, then whatever it takes, whether it be growing out of the pain, whether it be rectifying some things for yourself, reparenting yourself, loving yourself, being honest about some of the things that have happened to you, taking parents off pedestals. Parents have titles, but they're still human beings that 9 times out of 10 were just as broken when they had you as they're trying to pretend that they're not, right? So the greatest and the worst thing that ever happens to any of us is that we're born and we're placed in our parents' hands. The problems with being placed in your parents' hands is that everything that they are and everything that they're not and everything that they've ever dealt with, it's on you as well, right? So some of that guilt and shame is not even yours. It has something to do with a whole bunch of stuff before you. So you got to shake it off just so you can get clear on what that is and then figure out what's your stuff to deal with and what's not, and leave their stuff there for them to deal with so that you can walk on and really hold the things that are really yours to deal with so that you can breathe and make a difference in your own experience and then grow out of that. So guilt and shame, no benefits.
And everything you just said really is 1,000% true. And something I also wanted to address is what is connected with the parent and the guilt shame is this little voice that we have inside of our head. And a lot of times that voice, at least I noticed, is really my mother's voice. And I was like, why is her voice in my head even though I'm all the way away from her and she's not even knowing what I'm doing, but yet that little voice of Sierra, that's, that negative self-talk. So as we get towards our end, I do want to hear, one, Dr. Rose, your advice, but also from Ricardo and Gregory, because I know that just through exploring yourself, just being a human, you have to get thick skin. You have to have self-confidence. There are a lot of people out there listening who may not have that, who may not have tapped into that. And so just some advice on how to get out of that negative talk, how to get out of that guilt, how to stay in the moment. That's something I'm really working on. That's one thing I could say is just staying in the moment, staying present, being present. But just with as far as the voices, what are some things that we can start with you, Ricardo, that you did to really conquer that and get that confidence in yourself and explore yourself?
I gotta go, y'all, but thank you so much. I will check in with you next time.
Thank you so much.
Gregory.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you, Gregory.
Good to meet you. Thanks.
So just going off of that, so me personally, if I was ever in a really dark time and I just felt like just things were not going my way, I would try to think of everything as a bigger picture than what was just that solitary moment that made me feel that way. So what I normally like to do is I like to step back and just kind of think about it. Is this really worth my time? Is this really worth my energy? Is this worth my positivity for me to feel so bad and just detrimental about whatever is just causing at that moment? So I always like to think of it as just like a little obstacle I have to overcome, because obviously in life you're never given something that you can't overcome. You're never given something that is too much for you to handle and to just break down crying and stop. It's okay to show emotions. It's okay to just want to be alone sometimes, but you need to also look forward and just realize that there's always something better on the other side. Always try to see again life as like a bigger picture and just always realize that there's always better to come and there's always more that's coming your way instead of just always being upset or feeling guilty or anything like that. That's just how I like to see it, because obviously life not ending, you keep going. Even if you are currently in a really good or bad position in life right now, no matter what, it's going to change. But some things are in your control, some things are not. But again, just always look for the good that's coming your way.
Yep, that's 100,000% true. I would definitely say one thing my mom always says is when you reach rock bottom, the only place you can go is up. And that's true.
Exactly.
I mean, you got to reach lows to reach new highs. All of the traditional sayings are very true. I will say that. Whenever I'm going through something tough, it's like the most simplistic thing pops in my mind. I'm like, oh, wow. But yes, Dr. Rose, please also share your thoughts.
So with the voice thing, I always say, ask, is this about me or is this about them? Right? Sometimes the voice has nothing to do with us. It's just the voice that's been given to us. So we have to kind of analyze it to see if it actually is valuable for us or if it was valuable for a lifetime before us, right? Fears that are not ours. hopes and dreams that are not ours, expectations that are not ours, right? So kind of questioning the voice to see if it's actually relevant, because once you can remove its value, then you can lessen its importance in your own head. If you give it value, and sometimes the value is connected to the person, not actually the information. So even if you can start to separate that, it becomes easier also to remove it if you realize it is negative and not so much the thing that's actually aligned with what it is that you want and bring you forth a positive aspect, outcome, or whatever it is that you're looking to get. So voices, conversations, a lot of times those things that are ingrained, almost like a written code on our subconscious, come during an emotional experience, right? So a lot of those voices will have some fight, flight, freeze, fawn aspect to it, because that's also when it was written. So once we start to realize this voice has an emotional context to it that may or may not be mine, but was created during a time where something emotional was happening, but maybe not now, it also becomes a little bit easier to start to question its value and relevance so that you can remove it. I always say, even if you can't get the, chatty Cathy out of your head, you just don't want them driving, right? So if we can still devalue it enough to get it into the passenger seat, into the back seat, and then lock it in the trunk long enough for you to get through things, then success has still occurred, right? So finding a way to just understand what the voice needs, wants, where it was created, why it was created, and actually does it make sense right now, can help you to start to reorganize, but then also to override that code with your own thoughts, your own voice, and your own needs, wants, desires, dreams, and expectations.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's wonderful advice. Definitely, especially what you said about getting in the passenger seat, because that's the hardest part, especially when you're going through a tough time. And it's like, I was just talking to my father this morning. It's like, I think it's like I like to be fed. And it's like you feed into the voice more and more and more. So that's wonderful advice. And that's a great analogy. And I think that's a great way to wrap things up. Thank you to Gregory. I know that they had to hop off earlier, but thank you also to Ricardo and Dr. Rose. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone listening. We will be back next Thursday, of course, with a different moderator, Davon. So I'm super excited for that. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Nice
Thank you
meeting
for
you all.
having me.
Have a great night.
Likewise. Good night.